Hey programmers, what is going on? I am the Savage Coder, and welcome to episode 43. On 43? I am on 43. So, today I thought we'd take a little break from coding and make a video that covers a subject that keeps coming up throughout my career, and I think that maybe you should have some of these tools available to you to answer some of these questions about why does it take so long to do software development. This is easy. I just want this little thing. Why can't you do this? And so maybe this is a good video for managers, non-technical people, executives, or your friends and family that want to know what you do. And, it's hard to understand some of these concepts until you lay them out and show them. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today doing that, and hopefully we can clear some of these misconceptions up, and this will help you out in your day-to-day. So let's jump into this discussion, but first, all right, today we're going to talk about a fictitious application, and our application is called the Don't Forgetter. It's a very simple app that maybe is, in this case, I kind of laid it out like, like something on a mobile device. But this could just as easily be a web app or any other application. This is something I just threw together as an idea of something that I could build that would be really, really easy, really quick and dirty, right? We're just going to say, remind someone of something. When do you want to remind them? What text do you want to send them? And whether you want to send it to them through SMS text messaging, push notifications, or just send an email. We also have this option over here for whether the reminder is recurring. And then once you fill out this simple form, you just click this set reminder button at the bottom, and away we go. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the look and feel of the app. Even though this is an incredibly simple layout for an application, the first thing you have to realize is that the background doesn't come in purple. The text boxes don't have this bold white only border in them. The fonts that we chose are not base fonts. The radio buttons are unusually large sized for a mobile application. And so all of these things need to be styled out so that they resemble what's in this picture. Now, this is a really simple application, but if you think of your favorite website or your favorite application that you use, things like Word that have ribbon bars with multiple buttons, and each button has an icon, and each button has a shortcut, you can quickly see how you can't just throw something together like that. So the next thing we're going to look at here is the actual functionality, right? All right, so jumping into this application, the first thing we have to decide is what technology are we going to use. In the case of a mobile app, we have choices of Android or iOS. Those each have their own native environment and native programming languages. But even if you choose to make two versions of this app, one for Android, one for iOS, so even if you want to build these natively in Android, you have to choose between Java, which is the native language, and Kotlin, which is gaining a lot of steam as a way to build this app faster and easier. On the iOS side, for Apple devices, it's the same. You have choices between Swift, or you could use Objective-C, Swift being a more rapid development. You also have your choice of doing cross-platform, kind of write once and run on many platforms. And for those, you can do things like Flutter, you can use things like PhoneGap or AppCelerator, React Native for those of you who know React and want to use those React skills on a mobile device, and React Native runs on iOS and on Android. And then there's the Ionic and Xamarin from Microsoft. So you have so many choices that you have to weigh the pros and cons of each one of those. When you run React Native, you have the choice of whether or not you want to use frameworks within inside of that or use that natively. So that could take you a while to decide what it is you need and whether or not those multi-platform frameworks are going to do everything you need. In the case of this kind of a simple app, I think any one of those would run these just fine. So it might be even more difficult to decide when you don't need features. But then at that point, you should probably look ahead into the future and see what you think might be needed in the future and make sure the platform you're choosing supports that down the road. You also probably want the ability to shell out to native if you need to. Maybe you're writing in one language, but then you need to jump into Java to do some really, you know, maybe Android native things, or you need to go into Objective-C because Swift doesn't do everything you want. You want to have those options down the road and not be too limited. And the other things you're going to have to look at is cost. You know, how much of this stuff is free and how much is pay to play. So certain parts of your mobile framework might be, you know, they give you part of it for free, and if you want the better experience, you have items that you have to pay for. Also, when you go to host some of these platform independent ones, are there costs there? Do you have to host your native stuff? You have options like Firebase that have all of these different pieces in them, and you can get started for free. And then as you add customers, maybe you onboard a certain number of people, and then you'll have to start paying. There's authentication mechanisms like Auth0 and things like that, where you may want to add and maintain your user base. That starts off free or inexpensive, and you can quickly get into a lot of money. So you want to check on what your expenses are, and all of these things are going to determine, you know, possibly which framework and which things you use. And we haven't even looked at this app yet, right? So we're having these conversations where it could take you days of, hey, I need a few hours to play around with a few of these things so that we can decide which one's going to work best. Do we need to pay, or is the free tier good enough and we can stick with that? So, as far as time consuming and building an app goes, we have to bake this stuff in. We have to ask ourselves questions like, am I going to be able to charge my customers for this application? In a forgetter thing like this, probably not. I don't see anybody paying for this, but maybe there is a premium tier. So then you've got to think about, do I need other platforms to support this? If this is an app, do I also need a web page that's going to do this? If I'm going to have a web and a mobile and maybe a tablet version, what am I going to do to make sure that I can reuse pieces of my application's development? Right? Because if I build everything in an iOS app, then when I go to build it in Android, am I going to have to rebuild everything? I mean, where I store this data, because when I set up a reminder, I have to keep that until it's time to send it. I need some mechanism that's going to look and see if it's time to send something. Can I reuse that mechanism between the Android and the iOS? Maybe. Probably. And then if I have a website, can I share it with that? If I design it correctly, I should be able to reuse all of that and cut down on some of the time, but now we've got more pieces to the puzzle. And we'll talk more about that back end in a little bit, but before we do, let's jump right into this app. So we said this is really simple, right? It's 3 text boxes. You probably don't even need to we don't even need to talk about push notifications in email or recurring right off the bat to make a quick prototype and start testing, right? Well, wrong, unfortunately. Let's look at this remind who text box here. Who are we reminding? Are these our contacts? Do I need to interact with the contacts that are on my phone? If it's yes, what about handling permissions to the contacts list? Do I need to be able to create contacts in this app? If so, do I need another screen for that? If I'm just going to use the contacts database, then what happens when I pull up the web version? It doesn't have access to my phone's contacts. Do I have to sync those? Do I have to, how am I going to handle that? if I have my app on an Android device and I move to iOS, do I have to worry about that? What if I don't want to use the phone's contacts database? And I want to just store them myself in my own database. Well, now I need a database, and now I need to worry about add, edit, delete functionality. I've got to worry about how you add those, making sure there's not duplicates, being able to merge duplicates if they ever get in there anyway. And if I decide after all of that that maybe I just want to stick to the phone's contacts because at least they're there and I can use them. Well, when I created my contacts, I didn't always put my phone number for the text. I may have put it under mobile. I may have put it under business. I may have put it under home when I was just kind of filling out a form fast. If I put my email, do I know that that was the default email, or did I put it under their business email? What's this app going to do if I say, send Mary a text message, but Mary's phone is not in the right place? What does the app do? Should the app fix it and copy it into the right place? Or do I not want an app messing with my contacts at all, that it should just give me a message? So these are things you have to think about. And we're only on the first box here. So remind when. Is this a plain text box where we just type in a date, time? Is it some sort of calendar control with time? If it is a calendar control, do I have to scour NPM packages? And how do I, if I choose one of those, how do I sync that up with a web view if we're in fact going to have a web view? What's the experience going to be like from iOS to Android? How different are they going to look? So that when I put together any documentation for this app, I don't need as many screenshots between two devices, hopefully. If it is a calendar view, is there another view? Do I pop up a calendar here, and what does the time look like? Should those be native controls? And, if they are, do I have to worry about swapping the scene out, letting you select your date and time, and then bringing the scene back? Things like that. If I'm able to pick when you're going to be reminded, can I cancel a reminder? And if so, I don't have anything in this UI that allows me to do that. So how do I see my list of reminders as I'm adding them so that I can edit them? How do I edit them? How do I delete them? It looks like I'm missing a whole bunch of functionality now that you didn't even realize when you first looked at this picture. It's a simple little app, remember? So do we need to shrink this box down and add some controls? Do I need another screen to list my events and things like that? What about other time zones? If I'm reminding someone, can I guarantee they're in the same time zone as me? Even here in the United States, there are different states with different time zones. But then even around the world, what if you're traveling and I know you're traveling? Do I need to be able to put that stuff in and calculate that? When I make a reminder, how do I store the date and time in the database? Because at some point, something's got to wake up and send a reminder. Do reminders send from my phone? What if my phone's off? What if my battery goes dead? I still want Mary to be able to react to the reminder because I sent it to her. So obviously that can't happen on my device or on my website. Different time zones also have things like daylight savings time. Even though we're getting rid of that in the US, I don't know if it's actually going to happen. It supposedly is done, but we'll see what happens next daylight savings time, whether that sticks or not. So do I have to put code in there for that? Are there other places in the world that adopted daylight savings time that are not stopping? Possibly. I would have to research that. What about locales? When I pick a date and time, we write the date here in the United States as month, day, year, but most every place else in the world does year, month, day. So if I have this app running on another locale, possibly in another language, the dot in numbers typically is a comma where we use a period, and the date formats, like I said, are different. So do I need to support that stuff? What do I do if the user, the receiver of this reminder, has their phone in a do not disturb mode where notifications don't go off? Do I need to worry about exceptions? Do I need it to do something else where maybe if I selected push notification, but this thing's on silent, maybe I still should send them an email, even though it won't, alert them that an email came in or that a text message came in. Can I do something? Can I, add an indicator to, the icon that you have, missed reminders or something like that? All right, so let's look at remind what. Is this a straight text or does it support emojis and HTML if you want to use more of a rich text? So you have to decide that and then support that in the UI and make sure that if you're supporting things like rich text or HTML, that you have a way of escaping your characters, making sure people don't put in, JavaScript buttons and things like that, or trying to insert some kind of script there that could hack away at your code. So you want a way to sanitize it. You might even want to put in something to remove certain language. If this is a business app, you don't want curse words in there, so you'd want that scanned and maybe not able to send that kind of stuff, or maybe turn it into hashtags or asterisk stars or whatever. Do I have to do anything in this box to support other languages? What am I storing my text as? Make sure that the character set is supported there. How do I handle text limitations if I'm writing, inside this remind what text box here? How do I worry that maybe if this thing eventually sends tweets, they have 144 character length? Some text messages have a length before they split into multiple messages on some platforms. If I have it set to push notifications, I don't know how long the text is that'll even show up in one of those notifications, and there's probably a limit. Email would be much more forgiving. So, do I need, based on this selection down here, do I need to worry about the rules of how long our text can be? This brings us to this is recurring checkbox. I don't even know what this thing would do as just a text box, because would this cause a pop-up to happen? Probably. That you could select how often it recurs and what time, every week, every month, every year, until what date. So we would need to support that on the back end. And then what happens with this reminder once I set it? How do we get back to the recurring? So if we have some kind of another screen with a list of events, it's got to denote whether it's recurring and be able to allow me to edit that. Also, just by marking this recurring and setting up the recurring attributes of, let's say, every week or every month, whatever service it is that wakes up to check and see if something needs to be sent, it needs to handle this recursion. So if it happens every week, are we going into the database and pre-populating future events? And how often do we add to those? Because we can't add forever. So we have to kind of maybe calculate that out. And then at a certain point, once we get later in time, let's say I want to do this every week. And so I fill the rest of the year with every week. Well, at the end of the year, we're approaching the end of what I've filled out. We have to now go forward for maybe another year, or however we're going to do that. Or does the service wake up and say, give me a list of all the ones that are recurring, and let me see if any of them fall on a date or time that I should be sending now? So what if there's a problem here and we're not able to set a reminder? Maybe we haven't filled out a form. Where do we show warnings, and where do we show what's required and not required, and what do we want to say when it's required or not required? These are typically not decisions made by a developer. What text is shown to an end user has a lot to do with marketing and branding and how you represent yourself through your app. So usually a developer will say, hey, I'll show a message, but tell me what you want to say. So that's more work that has to go into this. Where do I show the user that if I picked someone, in the Who box and I select push notifications, where do I tell my user that's creating this reminder that the person who I'm sending this to must have this app installed in order to receive a push notification? Do we do that through a toast message? Do we have some other mechanism of doing that? What is that going to look like? So that needs to be decided. If we are going to support other languages, where do we get our translations? I have to hire a service, or do we have employees that are, professional translators? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And who's going to verify the translations? So you'll probably want to make some partnerships with some beta test users that speak those languages. I know that the translation services are not always perfect. Also, if you're going to just rely on like Google Translation to go in there and just use their free tool, there are ways to tokenize your text in your UI here, and you can use those, but they're not always accurate. You're going to need to bounce that idea by someone who speaks the language. So we talked about having other screens within our app. So if we do that, how do we navigate to those screens? Are we going to have a little hamburger menu with a slide out here? Are we going to put tabs on the top or on the bottom, depending on the platform? Those things would need to now get decided, because it pretty much seems like there's going to be more screens than this. Does this app have to work offline? What if we don't have cell or Wi-Fi? Can I still set a reminder? Or is the app completely useless if you're offline? It should have a way to work and store whatever you set, and then once it's back online, it should be able to sync the new reminders or edited reminders that it has out. Maybe editing isn't possible when you're offline. Maybe you're only able to create. Those are things you can talk about once you figure out how you're going to sync the data. So now that we're talking about syncing data, it's time to kind of discuss briefly the back end. I'm not going to go into too much of this, but in order to make this basic app work, we're going to need some kind of a back-end API, which is, just a bunch of code that listens to what this app's doing. I want to remind someone, I want to remind this person of this on this date. You send that information to the API and it stores it and takes care of it. So the API is going to have what we call CRUD operations for at least the contacts, if you're going to be storing your contacts somewhere centralized and not using the ones on the phone. So you would need CRUD is create, retrieve, update, delete. So you need to be able to do all of those functions with any of your contacts if you possibly are not using the phone's contacts. You definitely will need CRUD operations for all of this reminder data: who is selected, when they're going to be reminded, date and time, what we're sending them, whether it's text, push, or email, if it's recurring. When I click this button, I need to be able to send that and store it somewhere, add that data. We're going to need to be able to edit it, delete it, and possibly update it. Although you might be able to get away with deleting and adding as a way to update, like delete the old one and just add a replacement. So you have that option. In addition to storing the data and retrieving it so we can show it in the app, we also need some kind of a worker process that is going to actually spin up on a schedule and determine if it's time to send a message. So again, what do I use to schedule this? Is this a cron job on a Linux machine? Is this some kind of a background service? Is it a Windows service? Is it something that'll run in a Docker container that's just kind of a scheduled batch file, or a service that runs there? you have to figure things out, like how long does it take to send one of these reminders? And I bring this up because let's say this app gets popular and we have 10 million reminders to send out for all of our users all around the globe. Sure, you don't have to worry about this on day one, but you better have an idea in case it takes off. People get caught with viral apps all the time that don't scale, and they start failing and it's a disaster. And so you want to avoid that. So if it takes a long time to send a message before it can go to the next one, after a certain amount of time of sending out these events, the rest of them are going to be late. So you're probably going to need multiple of these concurrently running services that are sending all of the reminders. And so you probably don't want to be calculating if you should be sending one now. You should probably have some kind of a list that says, at this time, go, and maybe even be able to do some preparation on those and get them ready to send. You need to come up with a system to make these reminders at least send on time. Like, I can't guarantee that someone's going to receive an email as soon as I send it. If you send it to a very busy email server at a company, it may take 10 minutes for them to receive the email, and maybe that's not the best option. But we can at least say, hey, we emailed it on time. The push notification went out on time. I texted you right when the text message should have gone out. Maybe text messages always take, a half a second to send, so maybe we send them a half a second early so that they arrive on time. All of these things need to be researched and tested. So then we have to talk about, what do I do if I send a message and it fails? Right? With an email, I probably wouldn't know right away because those take time to bounce. But with a text message, maybe the service that I'm using to send SMS goes down. Things break from time to time, even with the biggest providers. So what do I do? Do I notify the person that the reminder couldn't be sent? Do I just keep trying until I can get as close as I can? Do I then have to change the message saying, was unable to deliver this on time? Do I do alternate things if I can't send them? Hey, I tried to send a text message, it didn't work. This person doesn't seem to have a push notification available because they didn't install the app. I'm going to fall back to an email just so I can try to remind this person of whatever it is. So you have to look at those kinds of things and what to do. And if you do decide to show an error, how do you show that in the UI? Is that a red toast? Is it, some other notification? You have to also ask yourself, would people stop using your app if they didn't receive a notification, right? Or a reminder. Hey, I set this reminder and I didn't get it. Well, there better be a good reason why they didn't get it. And there better be, obviously if things are down, things are down. There's nothing we can do about that. But maybe what we could do is, if we tried to send an SMS from the server and it wasn't able, maybe I can send some kind of a notification message back to the person who created the reminder and say, hey, our services are down, but I can send this SMS message through your phone. I think you'll see that, we're over a half hour now talking about all of the different things that we need to consider. And this is the simplest 3 text box app that I could think of. We've actually talked, me and some friends talked about some apps that have 1 text box and 1 button. And you wouldn't believe the list of features that we ended up stumbling across. The simplest application still needs so many pieces. What about deploying this app? I've got to join the developer programs for if they're mobile devices. If it's web, am I going to host it in the cloud? Am I going to host it with a hosting provider? Where do I host this? Does it go, okay, I'm going to use AWS or Azure or GCP or whatever I'm going to use. Am I going to put it in a Docker container and host it there? Am I going to spin up a virtual machine and host it there? Am I going to spin up just a built-in web app and host it there? Are my APIs going to become Lambdas? Or, there's so many solutions out there that you have to choose and research and see which is the best fit and which fits money-wise as well. So hopefully this was a really cool walkthrough of all the kinds of things you've got to think about when designing an application. And now when you come up with a 5 or 6 page website, which is tiny these days, or an application that has 3 screens, start drilling into those screens and really think about what is everything that could happen with each of these text box interactions. Do I need autocomplete? Do I need, I don't know. I mean, it could be anything. Do I want to validate email addresses instead of just having a text box? Do I want certain required fields to go through some other custom validation? Do I want to standardize addresses? There's so many things. You could just keep going and going and going. And then once you have this big list, the next best thing you can do is throw them up on a whiteboard or write them down on a piece of paper and get more than one person in the room and just say, hey, if I wanted to make my MVP, my minimum viable product, which of these features absolutely must be in my application on day one when I have 1 user or 2 users? They could even be friends that are just helping me test the app. What is the minimum thing that I need? For instance, in this app, I can get rid of 2 of these. Maybe we're just going to send email because these other 2 things, I don't even know how to do them off the top of my head, so I'm going to push that off and not worry about it. Do I need recurring reminders on day 1? Nah, that sounds like something that I could, make as a follow-up to the release. If version 1.1 or 2.0 is where I'm going to roll that feature out. And maybe I can add, text messages 2 days after I release. So boom, instantly, before you even have many users, you all of a sudden are adding features that make your app more valuable. So decide what is the minimum viable things you need, and that will give you your actual list of what you need to build. And then you can make those decisions and get your app off the ground. The most important thing after that is to just start the project. Get all these things nailed down. Once you have your MVP features, look at which of the things that we talked about in this video, which of those do you need to worry about now, and which of them are going to be important in 1.1. Everything we talked about has to be addressed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be predetermined at the time of your MVP. Things like, where am I going to host this? You have to decide that, right? You can't launch without that. So think about which things you could do, even if you hate the idea of launching without a perfect design or a feature that's going to separate you from your competition. You have time to add all that. MVP is MVP, minimum viable product. And then test with your end users. Make sure they love this application. Take all the feedback from them, what they love, what they hate. Don't try to talk them out of the things they dislike. Just say, okay, that's a great idea. And you can come back to them later with, hey, what would you think about this? And get their feedback on that. And when you have feedback from many, many people, if you hear the same negatives from more than one person, change it. Even if you think they're wrong, they're your customers and they're the ones that are going to make this thing fly. So take all of that into account, be innovative, be cutting edge, and everyone else will love your product as much as you loved building it. But hopefully this gave you an idea of how long it takes to build an application and the thoroughness you need to go through in order to, make this thing happen and get everything in that you want to get in. And so hopefully this was really cool and you learned something. I really enjoyed going through this and sharing some of the things I think of when I look at an application, and hopefully it helps you on your next project. So until next time, I will see you online.